where bad ideas get pulverized and the truth will set you free. Trentovision is hosted by Tom Trento, an activist street fighter with earned degrees in law enforcement, theology, and philosophy. Listen and watch every weekday at 2 p.m. on AM 1470 WNN and Trentovision.com. Now, let's take a peek at Tom's view of the world. Here's Tom Trento.
You really had to be there. It was surreal. You hear that word a lot, surreal. But you really had to be there to experience the moment. Can you imagine sitting next to a person whose son killed your son? Think about that for a moment. You're sitting down at a table next to a gentleman whose son took out an SKS automatic rifle at a distance of 3 feet and fired 12 rounds of 7.62 ammunition into your son and a gentleman standing next to him. Can you imagine being in the same room with the father of that individual who shot your son? Can you imagine sitting at the same table with the father of the individual who killed your son with a military weapon? Can you imagine joining together with that father, two fathers who lost two sons, in an effort to wake up America regarding the jihad that is taking place not in Egypt, not in Libya, not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, not in Iran, not in Israel, but in Little Rock, Arkansas. You can't get any more middle America than Little Rock, Arkansas. But can you possibly imagine joining together with a father whose son killed your son? Well, we did last night. Last night, myself, our United West team, and about 30 friends were together in a room at a hotel, Palm Beach County in Florida. And we saw a unbelievably important, vitally powerful documentary entitled Losing Our Sons, about two men who now stand shoulder to shoulder fighting Islamic Jihad in the United States of America. And my friends, last night from 3 to 8, 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock, for most of the evening there was not a dry eye in the place. To hear this sad, so very, very sad story, and to see the lives that have been devastated by it, but to see in a phoenix-type fashion human beings rising out of this mess and stepping forward in a positive way to identify a problem that this administration refuses to understand, refuses to acknowledge, refuses to name. And to see these men standing and their lives being portrayed in the story in this powerful movie, Losing Our Sons. Well, guess what? You can see it. We did this yesterday so that you, everybody watching right now, everybody listening, you will be able to see exactly what we experienced last night. You will be able to see Wednesday night, 8 o'clock on your computers, on your iPhones. because yesterday we put together a 2-hour special with the fathers who experienced the loss of their sons. One is dead, one is in prison. One who is dead was an Army veteran. He was in the Army, young guy. We're going to tell you about him today. The other one, who converted from Christianity to Islam, went to Yemen, became a jihadi, came home, looked for Jews to kill, looked for Christians to kill, looked for military people to kill, and killed this young guy who's now sitting in jail. Not remorseful, proud to follow in the steps of Muhammad, to kill the infidel. Well, you can watch this story Wednesday, 8 o'clock on your computers. The whole story, meet the fathers, see what we put together. Do not miss it. Right now, write down, save the date, Wednesday, October 17th, 8 to 10 at night, on your computer, on your iPhones. This is the new media, folks. We're making it so that you can see it wherever you may be. Hi, it's Tom Trento with you on another absolutely beautiful Monday afternoon. How many days, CJ, before the end of Western civilization, or maybe the beginning of a new America? November 6th, we're checking, I think it's 23. I started counting down at 669, launching a movie called Iranium with David Horowitz out at the Lux Hotel in Beverly Hills, January, with one of the producers, Richard Green. I started writing down 669 days to go. Well, it's 23 days to go right now. But in any event, it's great to be here on Trento Vision. You're listening on WNN 1470 in South Florida. You're driving in your car. You're on 1470. When you stop at a red light, call your friends up, tell them to listen. This is a fascinating hour because we have in studio the driving force, the person that made this documentary that is so effective as an educational, motivational tool to help us understand the failures of this administration and the success of human nature when families come together for the right purpose. You're on TrentoVision.tv, as you know. I run the United West, a counter-terrorism organization. Trento Vision is the communications side of our work. And our job right now for the next 23 days is to educate you Floridian voters, particularly the Christians, the Jews, and the veterans, as to how to vote intelligently, how to Romney and vote intelligently, okay? We've got to defeat this president on national security reasons. We've been pounding him on Benghazi, pounding him on this nonsensical Osama died, GM's alive. Well, let me tell you the new little saying we now have. The new saying is, Osama died, Obama lied, and GM is fried. Okay? Let's do that one again, kiddies. Osama died. Yes, Obama lied. He lied about his involvement. We will have General Paul Vallely on at the end of the week, who was contacted by a whistleblower in the Pentagon, who told the story that President Obama was not even notified that the SEALs were on their way to kill Osama bin Laden until the helicopter passed through Pakistani airspace. He was on the golf course. We're going to bring you that story. And this nonsense about GM being the hallmark of the economic recovery package for the president. GM is going bankrupt. And if this president wins, there's going to have to be another stimulus, another buyout for GM, because the stock that the country owns, 500 billion shares, 26% of GM, was bought at $56. It's now down to $23. And guess what, folks? We're paying GM $16 billion. Osama died, Obama lied, GM is fried. That's what we typically do. Today, though, we're going to look at this movie, which is so very important. Our super guest, my good friend in the studio right now, is somebody that we can have on for 3 or 4 hours, Charles, but it's only going to be an hour. We have no commercials. Call up your friends. You're going to be privileged to enter into a conversation with Dr. Charles Jacobs and Tom Trento. Charles, hello. How you doing?
Gee, Tom, you know, you're so shy. You're so reticent. Don't you think you ought to speak up and say actually what's on your heart?
No. I'm nuanced. I'm very nuanced. It's the Newark stuff. You know about that,
Newark,
right?
Newark. Tom and I were both born in Newark, New Jersey, and that makes us blood brothers.
Yes, absolutely. And ironically, if you were born in Newark, you were a blue collar person of some sort, and usually Democrat, and all of that. And in my college days, my conversion to Christianity, basically, that's the thing that made me see the world differently. I moved toward the conservative spectrum, side of the spectrum. But you were a leftist, lunatic, hardcore left liberal, weren't you?
Worse.
Tell us about that. First of all, tell everybody who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into your life a little bit, and then this phenomenal movie you made.
I'm Charles Jacobs. I've been an activist in the Jewish community and beyond for the last 25 years. I helped start CAMERA, the organization that monitors the media for media coverage of Israel. I guess I'm best known for my work on Sudan, where I was the one who broke the story in the New York Times that Arabs have black slaves today in Sudan and Mauritania.
Whoa. Arabs have what?
There's an active slave trade in North Africa.
Right now, today.
In Sudan.
Now, might these Arabs be Muslims?
Yes. And in fact, just to briefly tell you, the Arabs conquered North Africa in about 800. They swept across in a jihad, and they subjugated the people of North Africa.
Through peaceful, loving means.
With a sword.
Okay.
And through peaceful, loving means. For both. If you didn't like the peaceful, loving means, you got the sword.
Okay. See how that works.
And one of the things that they did was they enslaved the blacks. And this is true in Mauritania today, even though the blacks that they now own are Muslim. That is, according to the Quran, you are not supposed to enslave a fellow Muslim, but in this case, just like in the West, racism trumps ideological religious doctrine. And today in Mauritania, there are Arab Muslims who own African Muslims. And this is a story that really ought to get out to Louis Farrakhan, because Louis Farrakhan is telling black people in America that Islam is the path to freedom. Not in Mauritania, and even if you're a Muslim, and not in Sudan, where the Arabs had a jihad against the Christian South and killed between 2 and 3 million people.
Now, when was that? When was that jihad?
Over the last 20 years. Slowly over the last 20 years, 2 and 3 million people. This is all documented in the State Department documents, and even the human rights community knows this. But as part of that onslaught, they would storm African villages in trucks and jeeps and camels and horses, and they would shoot the men and capture the women and children as slaves and take them north and sell them or own them or trade them. They would shoot the men because it's not, unlike slavery in the West, this was not about cotton or tobacco, and they didn't want they didn't need musculature, they needed wombs. And it was about expanding the power of Islam through the wombs of the captured slave women. And the little girls were, housekeepers until they reached puberty, then they became sexual slaves. And the little boys were goat herds until they reached puberty, when they had their throats slit, mostly.
Boy, oh boy.
So I broke the story in the New York Times, and for the next 10 years, we worked very hard to build a coalition around South Sudan, which was a very unlikely coalition of left and right. We put together, imagine, Barney Frank and Pat Robertson.
Wait. Barney Frank and Pat Robertson, like sitting in a car with you driving
not
around?
in the same. No, not in the same.
Oh,
room.
you couldn't. You're not that good. You couldn't get them together.
Couldn't
Okay.
get them together. But they were both
They agreed
on our
on the
side, and
topic.
they both the liberals, were against slavery, and especially against black slavery.
Oh, that's nice of them.
It was, and it was important. And in fact, we got the Black Caucus, and we got important people on the Black Caucus who you wouldn't have thought necessarily, like Donald Payne of New Jersey. Eleanor Holmes Norton was the most articulate and fiery person that I ever heard on this topic. And on the right, we got Sam Brownback, a wonderful senator, now governor of Kansas, Pat Robertson, and the Christians who cared and who knew, even before I understood this, that this was a jihad against Christianity. And to make a long story short, the news finally got to President Bush, who, after all the human rights community leaders neglected to help and downplayed the story because it wasn't politically correct. After all, they only care about white sin.
Yeah.
Right. So there were no bad white guys in the story. So there were no. The slaves got no help from UNICEF or Amnesty or etc. But somebody got to George Bush, and he forced upon the North and the South a treaty that eventually, a year and a half ago, wound up creating the newest nation in the world, South Sudan, which had a partition vote and split off from Sudan and now is a free Christian nation, allied with Israel. And it's a very good story. It's very nice.
That is, you need to be commended. I think you've received awards and all for your work doing that.
I got an award from Coretta Scott King.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
very, very neat. And we have some good friends now that are, some Catholic friends that are working with the South Sudanese, the Lost Boys, all of them. And just recently went on a trip, a very dear friend of ours, for 6 or 8 weeks. Then she was out of contact with us, and we were very concerned about her and all of that. But we're keeping our eye on the South Sudan, the newest country in the scale of countries. It'd be nice if when you had a new good country like that, you'd knock off, like one of the bad countries has to fall into the ocean or something. That would be very nice if it worked that way. Or if we took the UN building and knocked it right down into the Passaic River or whatever that is over there. The Hudson. I think it was on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria where Muslims came up the Hudson River and founded America, right?
That's what they tell you. Right.
We actually have heard that. We were in the United West, we infiltrate Muslim entities and things. We infiltrate. I can give you state secrets here.
You walk in.
We walk in the front door and buy a ticket. And the speakers were there one day. This is in June. They were talking about how Muslims were on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria coming to America with Christopher Columbus. So that was an interesting bit of history.
It was Ahmed Columbus.
Ahmed
It was not Christopher.
Ahmed Columbus.
It was Ahmed.
And that's where our dear president studies his Islamic history from, because Islam has done so much for America. Now, let's go back a little bit before that, so the audience, the viewers, and the listeners. And you know what? Today we'll take some calls, folks, if you want to talk to Dr. Charles Jacobs. The number is 888-565-1470. He was a former leftist, became a conservative. I want you to tell everybody why in a second. He's a hero with helping free black slaves in Africa. And he formed a watchdog organization, CAMERA, to help expose the abuses and irregularities and lies about Israel. And now he runs an organization. What's the name of your organization?
Americans for Peace and Tolerance.
That name.
It drives
It's so
it drives
lefty.
our adversaries loco. Right. Yes.
You know, you would think your office would be like flowers and fluffy and pink and all of this. And what's a guy from Newark doing with Americans for Peace and Tolerance? You know, but you're smart. You're smart. You're beating them at their own game. So how'd you become a righty when you were a lefty?
Well, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, and my parents were secular Jews whose religion was the left, and I was born into leftism. And I cared a lot about civil rights. I actually went on the march, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" march. I was there.
Oh, you really?
I was.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how old I am.
Wow.
And then I went to Brandeis as a graduate student, unfortunately, and I got really leftized.
Leftized there.
And I was very close to the Progressive Labor Party, which is like a Stalinoid.
You're in Allen West territory. We don't like those progressive caucuses.
Well, my story is not too far different from David Horowitz's story in this regard. He was higher up on the left than I was, but I thought I cared about justice, and I was tricked and fooled. And it was an identity thing. I was a young kid. This is what I'm going to do for my life. I'm going to save the world and make a revolution. Until it turned out that the left turned on Israel viciously, viciously turned on Israel. And I recall one day, it just happened one day, I was helping run a rent strike. I speak Spanish. I did some schooling in Spain. I speak Spanish, and I was leading.
You went to Harvard too.
Yeah.
You got your doctorate.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
You got your doctorate at Harvard.
I did.
Okay.
I did. I'm very sorry.
Okay.
So one day I was leading a rent strike in Spanish, and the leftists were there. We were having a meeting, and the leader of the rent strike lefty party wanted to make it known that some of the landlords that we were fighting were Jews. I blew up. That was it. Why? What's that about? And then I saw, of course, that the left turned against Israel. The left lost the proletariat, right? This dream that the workers of the world were going to unite under their banner was lost to them, and they're looking for another mass of people, and they picked the Muslims, right? That's what they did.
That's what happened.
That's exactly what happened. So I was furious, and I think a lot of that rage still burns in me, and I move on it.
Let me ask you this, because you are in Jewish land here. You're from Boston.
Right.
You're in South Florida. You're very familiar with it. We're in Boca Raton. There are 500,000 Jews within the range of our 50,000 watt signal. I think every one of them are listening right now. And if numbers are true, then it was 78. It's dropping, man, to about 65% are just lockstep with Obama, just hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Charles, please tell our audience, and if anybody wants to question him on this, 888-565-1470, Tom Trento, Charles Jacobs on WNN and on TrentoVision.tv. If anybody wants to question Charles or make a comment, we'll take it today. Why do your tribe members blindly follow a guy who hates Israel? Please help us out.
Okay, so this is a very important question. It's a very serious question. A lot of people smarter than I have written books about it. Norman Podhoretz, Ruth Weiss, The Liberal Betrayal of the Jews, one of the best little books ever, Ruth Weiss, Wisse. I'd say there's a few reasons. Some people call it the Jew flu. I call it Jupus. There's lupus. Lupus is a disease where your own internal body fights against itself. So Jupus, right?
Okay.
So Jupus is the Jews who have special antibodies of brilliance, supposedly aimed at the anti-Semites that are always surrounding us, right? But in Jupus, the disease turns those things around, and in the Chomskyite case, which is the extreme case, murders the host. Right, it's suicide. So, what is it about? It's about, in part, the history of the Jews being more favored by the left than the right. I mean, there's a lot of history that we have where the people on the right, the church in Europe and the popes and the aristocracy and the leaders of Europe were the ones who whipped up the crowds against us and killed us and pogromed us and murdered us and forcibly converted us. So there was always, in the modern times, a kind of resentment against the right. And then the left, there was the promise of that we would become like everybody else, the universalist dream, that Jews would not have to be treated like could be citizens of the new emerging nation states, and that's what the Jews lusted for. They wanted peace. Who wants to have enmity? And so the left was seen as the liberating force for Jewry in most of the time. So that's what sets us most up in that way. And a lot of Jews falsely remember that Roosevelt is a hero, and he was not a hero to the Jews. I mean,
I hear CJ laughing in the control room over that one.
So that's also true. I mean, Roosevelt did not save the Jews. I mean, except he won the war. Good.
Right.
Defeated the Nazis. Couldn't be better than that.
Yep.
But he did not save the Jews, and in fact rejected the Jews who fled here. So that's one reason, the historical. The other is that it's very hard to be a Jew in the world, and now more, it's getting harder every day, it seems. If you look at Europe, Jews are getting beaten up and punched and spat on and chased out of Europe by the Muslims and the left. And one way to escape this is to not defend yourself, is to say that I care about all of humanity. You Jewish Zionist guy, you care about this little tiny tribe, but I care about everybody. And so I can escape the burdens of being a Jew by becoming a universalist, a citizen of the world.
That's very interesting.
I'm a citizen of the world, and so no one has to hate me. You see, I'm not fighting for myself, this little Jewish tribe. I care about everybody. So you find Jews on the left who fought for the blacks, who fought for the gays, who fought for women, who fought for Cesar Chavez, but who don't fight for themselves. And and there's one other little piece of this. Andrea Levin, who started Camera, and I helped start Camera, her husband is Ken Levin. He's a brilliant psychiatrist. And he puts it this way. He says, imagine the abused wife going to the psychiatrist, or the abused child. The husband beats them. The father beats them. What they don't want to think is that they beat them for nothing, out of chaos, out of just a mood, out of whenever it struck them, whenever they felt like it, they beat them. Because if you think of the world that way, you have no control. It's out of your control. But if you think that you did something that fomented, that prompted the beating, you feel a sense of control. So the Jews blame themselves. They're like the abused, and we're an abused people, right? In a way, we're
historically, sure, of course.
So we like to think that we must have done something to the Palestinians. We must have done something to even the Germans. We must be wrong, because if we're not wrong and they're going to beat us anyway, my God, what kind of a world is that?
What is that? Yeah, right. No, that's very interesting. I have not heard it broken down in those levels. CJ broke it down a little differently while you were speaking. She said, the Jewish mind says, I care about everybody and I recycle.
Sure.
I didn't do a thing to deserve that, I'm sure. All right, well, put a concluding thought on that.
So you can get very depressed. As a Jewish person, I get this question all the time, especially from the Christians I work with, who are more Zionist.
And I'm one of them. I'm one of the Christians.
But in Boston, where I'm from, and around the country, I work very closely with Christian pro-Israel people who I love dearly, and who I have to tell you, folks, they're going to save us. So they ask me this question, and I can complain to. It's very depressing when you think about it. So a very important man whose name I probably shouldn't mention because it was a private conversation. He's one of us, and he said, "Stop being depressed about the Jews. Forget it. We lost 60-70% of the Jews. We got 60% of the Christians. Would you have it any other way?"
Oh, interesting. A cost-benefit analysis on that. I'm going to ask you, we're going to go into losing our sons in a moment. And we're at the bottom of the hour. For those of you just joining us, Tom Trento on TrentoVision.tv, where you can watch our radio show. And you can wave to that camera right there, Charles. The whole world is watching. Well, at least Mark Campbell, as he's editing, I think. He's probably watching. But we will take calls, 888-565-1470. You can ask myself or Charles anything. We're on WNN 1470, broadcasting in beautiful Boca Raton on the 15th of October, 75 beautiful, no humidity degrees, and it's one of these wonderful Chamber of Commerce days. But still, well, let me ask you this, because we're down to an election. I mean, this election is so important. And in the state of Florida, literally, the Jewish vote can swing the election. What you're going to speak to a lot of Jewish people listening. What's your call to action for them to vote for Israel? How do they do that?
Well, first of all, they've got to understand that there are a lot of issues that they care about. I know Jews care about abortion. I know Jews care about gay rights. I know Jews care about social justice. But those things are not at stake in this election. Not really. Not really. No one's going to invert any reality in those spheres. What's at stake is the life of the Jewish state. And don't anyone think that that's not the case, because Israel is surrounded in a sea of Arab winter, not Arab spring, where the Muslim Brotherhood is taking over the governance of hundreds of millions of people. And I can tell you, and you ought to know by now if you listen to Tom, or even if you don't, even it slips out sometimes in the pages of the New York Times from time to time by mistake, I'm sure. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to kill us all. And the Muslim Brotherhood now runs Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood may take over Syria. And the Muslim Brotherhood looks like it's got maybe Libya and maybe Jordan. So the Jews are surrounded by people who are worse than the bad tyrant dictators. That was Jimmy Carter's mistake, right? The Shah is bad. How can we be for the Shah? Let's knock off the Shah. And what has he got? He's got Khomeini. And he's got now a Khomeiniite maniac nation, which may be nuclear armed at any moment. So think about the smiling little boys and girls of Israel. Think about the Jewish people of Israel, and make that the top priority. Make that the top priority, because I think in this time, God only wants one thing from the Jews, and he'll only ask one question when you die. What did you do? What did you do in your life to protect the Jewish people? So I think that would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Charles Jacobs, very much for that. Now, you're in town for a couple of days. Yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, what we did, from 3 to 8, we rented a hotel room, and we brought Charles in with the two fathers that he's going to explain, a small focus group of about 30 people, and we shot a 2-hour special on Charles' movie, Losing Our Sons. The special will be shown Wednesday night on your computer on Trento Vision, on the UnitedWest.org, both of those, on your site too. Probably we'll put it up there. It'll be shown Wednesday night, 8 to 10. It has the movie, but it also has the fathers speaking, dialogue with the audience, commentary by Charles. Fascinating 2-hour documentary. That's Wednesday, 8 to 10 on your computer. Tomorrow night, Tuesday, if you're in the northern Palm Beach area, you can go to Rabbi Barry Silver's synagogue, Lador Vador, 7400 Lake Worth Road, out west on Lake Worth Road. And if you need more information, contact Tom at TrentoVision.tv. That'll be around 5 o'clock. Charles will be there. I'll be there showing the film. And we'll have a group of a couple hundred people to talk to personally. Now, let's get into the film. Tell us about this film, and I want the audience, the listeners, and the viewers to understand it from your perspective, why you put it together, and the importance of it.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for having the focus group come last night, because it's always wonderful to see people's response to this film. And you were right, nobody didn't cry.
It was amazing.
So, this is a nightmare. This is an American nightmare. There's a black middle-class family, true story, in Memphis. The dad, Melvin Bledsoe, owns and operates a small tour company. He's got 6 or 8 buses. His son, Carlos Bledsoe, grows up in the business, helps his dad, a lot of fun, close family, church-going Baptist black family. The son goes off to Tennessee State University. The father hopes that he'll learn business. He'll come back and maybe even join the business, and that would be a wonderful thing. Instead, however, at Tennessee State University, he gets converted to Islam. He gets converted to the worst sort. He gets converted to radical Islam. They send.
Now, what year was all of this?
2008, 7, 8. He gets and his father in the film says, some strange things started to happen. He had a dog. He loved his dog, and one day he took his dog out in the woods and let his dog go because somebody told him that if you love Allah, you can't have dogs. He took Martin Luther King's picture off the wall. He said that he was no longer his hero anymore. He wanted to become Islamic. He said he no longer believed in Jesus Christ.
They were a Christian family.
They were a Christian family.
Okay.
And the next thing, he comes and he tells his dad that I'm going to go to Yemen. I'm going to study Arabic.
Wait a minute. He's in Memphis, Tennessee, and he's going to go to Yemen?
He's going to go to Yemen. Okay. Now, we have on the film showed you the kind of literature and the kind of preaching that goes on in the mosques in Nashville. And we've also shown what is the United States policy of immigration in the Bible Belt, which is it seems, to flood the Bible Belt with Somali Muslims, with Kurdish Muslims, if you were a conspiratorialist, you would say to dilute the power and the culture of the Bible Belt. We're now talking. This is the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Nashville, Tennessee.
So
you can't get any more Christian than that.
And you can't. And so he goes off to. And not only in the mosques, but these fellows are in the schools. They're in Vanderbilt. They're teaching in Vanderbilt, and we've got a clip on the film where some fellow stands up in Vanderbilt and says to the imam there, "Well, is it true that according to Islam you have to kill gay people?" And he says, yes. He says, "Well, do you believe that you have to kill gay people?" He says, "Well, I have no choice because I'm a Muslim. I have to follow the teachings." So this is what's being taught in our universities, and later on we'll get into other universities. So he goes off to Yemen, supposedly in a language school, but the only way he can get in is with a reference from a Wahhabi, a Wahhabi minister somewhere, or a Wahhabi clergyman in Tennessee.
The worst of the worst.
The worst
basically.
of the worst, right. This is Osama bin Laden's school of Islam. He goes there, and to make a long story short, he stays there. He meets Al-Qaeda. He gets trained. He comes back, and he was told to do something for Allah. He comes back, and he has a list of Jewish organizations and Christian organizations and military organizations that he is going to attack. He firebombs a rabbi's house. He shoots up another rabbi's house, one in Little Rock, one in Nashville, sorry. Thank goodness the rabbis were not at home, nor were their families. And then he drives into Little Rock, where he finds an Army recruiting station, and he kills an Army recruiter named Andy Long, and wounds Andy's compatriot. So we found the father of Carlos Bledsoe, who, by the way, when he converted to Islam, is Abdul Hakim Muhammad.
Abdul Hakim Muhammad,
warrior
from was this first Carlos Bledsoe?
Carlos Bledsoe. Okay, so this is the nightmare scenario. You have a middle class black kid goes off to school. Carlos Bledsoe comes back. Abdul Hakim Muhammad, jihadist. We found Melvin, the father. And then we found the father of the Andy Long, Darius Long. And I went and I met them both, and we interviewed them both, and we asked them, and we found that They weren't getting their story out. No one was paying attention. No one was, they weren't being allowed to warn the American people about this possibility, this actuality. And they agreed to come together. And as Tom said at the start of the show, Darius Long's son was killed by Melvin Bledsoe's son. And they came together, and they decided, I think they might have made a pact. They decided that no matter what, they lost their sons, and they're going to tell the story, and they were going to cooperate in making this film, which they did.
I had an opportunity last night, Charles, to, after the whole 5-hour taping and all that, to spend a little time with Darius Long, the father of Andy, who was killed by Hakeem Muhammad. And Darius Long, you know this, the audience doesn't, 27-year Marine, tough Marine, combat Marine, in battle, all of that. And what a sharp guy, what an amazing guy.
And in addition to being sharp, he's extraordinarily sharp.
Yeah.
We brought him to Congress to testify. We helped and that happened. And in the film, you can see him. He explains it better than an awful lot of other people that I know who are super intellectuals. You know, he said in the film, he said, Islam is many things. It's a religion, and our Constitution protects that, as it should, the free expression of religion. But it's also economic, and it's also military, and it's also ideological. And until we can sort those things out, we're never going to get to the bottom of this. So Darius is an amazing person. Another aspect of Darius that I find immensely humane. He doesn't do any of this out of hatred. He has spent a lot of his years in Afghanistan, knows many, many Muslim people. He's not a hater, and he's not an Islamophobe or a bigot. He's a decent human being whose son was slaughtered by a jihadi and who wants to warn the nation. Melvin Bledsoe is a salt-of-the-earth guy. He could have come from Newark.
Yeah, he really could have.
He's a wonderful, wonderful man who, I think the way he expressed it last night is that God told him that his duty is to warn America. And as he ends the film with, today my son, tomorrow maybe your son. And these two men together, when you see them together, shaking hands or embracing, it's there's not a dry eye in the house. So the questions is how the hell did this awful thing happen in America and not many people know? How did it possibly happen? And what we show in the film is that this is a failure of American leadership. A lot of people are worried about we don't know enough about Islam, and I think we ought to learn a lot more about Islam. But we may never be able to change the jihadis. We may never be able to change them. But what we really need to do is to change the failed leaders on every level. In every city, there are mayors in this country who wouldn't know how to respond to the request to help us build a mosque. They wouldn't know how to think of this in any other way but, these are just one more minority culture that we have to accommodate. And if we have any questions about this, if we express any worry, any concern, we're Islamophobes, racists, bigots, etc. So every mayor in every city is open to helping this happen. It happened in Boston, which is another story, where I am. Then you have the media. Right? The media is politically correct. The media, which doesn't like America much anyway, which thinks we're all greedy people, clinging to guns and Bibles and prejudices and biases and hatreds.
Well, hang on one second. I saw something the other day. Remember President Obama so artfully said in a hot mic situation, I think it was Pennsylvania, people, they cling to their religion and their guns, right? Yeah. In a derogatory sense. Basically, the thrust of his statement was they should not be clinging to their God and their guns. When is he going to tell that to the Muslim community in the Middle East? Tell them, you better stop clinging to your gods and your guns.
Well, what he said in the Middle East when he went there, and this is on our film, he went to Cairo, as we all know.
Yep.
He hasn't gone to Israel by the way. As
too
a
far
president.
from Egypt.
He's
It's
not,
too far.
This is the first
He could have
president.
walked across the desert
Yeah,
and made it,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, I'm sure Bibi
The
would
guy
have-
hates Israel. It's that simple. He really does.
He hasn't been to Israel, and this is very worrisome. What can it possibly signal to the Arab world? When he was in Cairo, he said to them that his job, I mean, this is the President of the United States, his job is to ensure that Islam is not defamed. That's his is that his day
nice.
job? So that's what he said. So anyway, I mean, what's important for that in our story is that when Darius and Melvin testified to Congress, the administration...
The fathers, Darius and Melvin, yeah.
The fathers. The administration sent people to testify, and they were asked, doesn't this have anything to do with radical Islam? And they said, no.
They being the administration
The
said
Obama administration...
the shooting has nothing to do with radical Islam.
Nothing to do with radical Islam. It has to do with Al-Qaeda. Well, doesn't Al-Qaeda express radical Islamic theology? No, Al-Qaeda is murderers. Well, and when you saw yesterday, when the audience sees this denial, this absolute... They get
From State Department
this was
officials.
The Army. This
was
the
an Army official, okay.
And then Holder was asked, Eric Holder,
Attorney General
Attorney
Holder.
General of the United States was asked, why did the guy, the fellow, I forgot his name, who tried to blow up his car in Times Square and brag to the judge, brag to the judge,
So.
he wanted to kill as many Americans as he could. Do you think he was motivated by radical Islam? And Holder is sitting there saying, excuse me, by what? By radical Islam. Well, there are many, many reasons why people do these things. Well, do you think one of them could be, well, radical Islam? And Holder says, well, there are many, many reasons why people... So it's clear there's a policy in the administration to deny that we have an idea, to deny the nature and extent of the enemies that seek to do us in. And if you want to think now, the media is focused on Benghazi, where for how many days they didn't want to say it was terrorism?
2 weeks.
For 2 weeks they didn't want to say it was terrorism, even though they knew.
Of course.
Because they were directly tied to while it was happening. They had
Yep.
open mics there. But Benghazi was preceded by Little Rock. And our movie was the first time on American soil a murder happened, and our country is saying it has nothing to do with the thing that inspired it, with radical Islam. And to this day, Darius Long's son, Andy, is not being given the Purple Heart.
Wait, say that again? He was killed. This is a jihadi claiming to be fighting for, I saw the movie, fighting for Allah, fighting for Muhammad, no remorse, claiming that it wasn't a true murder because it was Islamically justified.
Right.
I mean, he knows the threat doctrine of Islam inside out. That was a jihad attack of a military. He was shot because he was in a uniform. What is the Army saying about the Purple Heart for Andy?
So Carlos Abdul Hakim Muhammad says, I did it for Allah. It is Islamically justified. I did it for Allah. Okay. Now, to get a Purple Heart, a lot of people are confused. You don't have to jump out of a foxhole and throw yourself on a grenade to get a Purple Heart. You just have to be killed in a war against America, right? You don't have to do anything heroic. You don't
Right.
earn the Purple Heart.
Right.
It happens to you. You get a Purple Heart. Not here, because they say it was a drive-by shooting,
That's
as though it was a cocaine bust.
That's
right?
unbelievable.
It was a drive-by shooting. So if you want to, one of the ways that your audience can help us, can help both the two fathers and the dead man, Andy Long, who the film is dedicated to, is to go on our website and sign the petition.
Tell them your website.
The website is Peace and, I mean, Tom hates this, but, you know, Peace and Tolerance, A-N-D, peaceandtolerance.com. And you'll see clips of the film, you'll see short clips of the film, and you'll see the petition to do it.
Peace and Tolerance.
No.
Org?
Com.
Oh, .com. Peaceandtolerance.com. Sign the petition, and what happens? All those names go...
Well, we're collecting the petitions. We're going to bring them personally to the Army. which has to make this
to
decision.
help Andy, who would have been 23, 24 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
Get the Purple Heart. Just a recognition of the fact that he died in combat fighting Al Qaeda. He wasn't even fighting; he was just assassinated.
By the way, the Fort Hood murders.
Right.
The exact same thing is happening. They're not getting Purple Hearts, and you know what the government calls that? Workplace violence.
Yeah,
that's workplace violence. And in fact, the guy who shot them, he bragged about the killing in Little Rock before he shot them. He bragged about the murder.
Hassan, Major Nadal Hassan.
Major Nadal Hassan bragged.
Did he
and
really?
Praised
I didn't know that.
Carlos Bledsoe, Abdul Hakim Muhammad,
Oh.
before he killed 13 Americans.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Trento, Charles Jacobs here on TrentoVision.tv. We've got just a few minutes left. Beautiful October day. If you need any other reason, you don't need any other reason to defeat this administration, this president, than just to go to peaceandtolerance.com, watch the trailer, or go to theunitedwest.org. Charles's trailer is there about this movie. All you have to see is the trailer. Google Losing Our Sons. Look at the story. It's a failure of phenomenal magnitude of this administration in allowing Americans to understand the threat of Islam, allowing our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to name the enemy. One of the issues, Charles, last night from the focus group, they kept saying, why can't the U.S. government call jihad jihad or Muslim terrorist Muslim terrorist? What's that all about?
I made a mistake. It's peaceandtolerance.org.
I'm
sorry.
But it probably will go.
It's the Florida sun.
Okay.
It's the heat. It's the heat.
You're hanging by the beach too much, man. What's the story with this U.S. government can't name the enemy? What's that all about?
Look, there is a huge intellectual warfare going on right now in the world, in the West. Do we have a civilizational conflict with Islam, or is it just that a few people quoting or misquoting the Quran are using that to, for some reason, either because they're nuts or because they want money or because they like blood, using that to attack us? And the fact of the matter is, we don't want to think that there's a civilizational conflict because, I don't know about you, Tom, but I don't sleep a lot. It's not.
Not lately.
It's not a great. I mean, we have a wonderful life in America. We're fat and happy. I mean, I know the unemployment rate is high, and I know there's a lot of suffering. But my God, compared to the rest of history and the rest of the world, if we can straighten out this economy, which we can. Americans live better than anybody ever lived. I mean, the poorest of Americans live in many ways better than the kings and queens of the of the 15th century. So, who wants to think that there are barbarians at the gate? That there's this huge force that is riling itself up. It's their time. They're excited. They're animated. They see us as weak. Every time we appease them and we try to make friends, I mean, it's as though we're listening to our mothers who said about the playground bully, well, if you're nice to Johnny, Johnny will be nice to you. It doesn't work that way in the world. Johnny's not nice to us. Muhammad is not nice to us. And so people don't want to think that. Or they want to do like the abused wife. It's our fault.
It's our fault.
We must have done something, like
Yep.
the video about Muhammad. We must have done something to get these people to hate us so much. Well, guess what? We didn't. We just are what we are, and they hate us.
They hate us. Well, why don't you, Joe Citizen, I think you remember Joe Citizen in our little chat room. He's saying hello to you, so you can see him out there for sure. And why don't you take about 30 seconds, give us your closing thoughts. We got to wrap it up. The hour went very, very quickly. I wish we had more time, but we don't. But you can see Dr. Charles Jacobs, myself, tomorrow at Rabbi Barry Silver's Synagogue, Lador Vador, 7400 Lake Worth Road, about 5 o'clock tomorrow. Contact me, though, tom@trentovision.tv for the exact time. It may change. Why don't you take 30 seconds, your concluding thoughts?
Okay, so we're flying blind. We live in a fog of political correctness. We're falsely happy and at peace, but we all are worried in some way. I think an awful lot of people sense something is wrong. So a movie like we've made here makes it very, very clear what's wrong, who's at fault, and kind of how to fix it. And we as Americans had just better have new leadership, people who will stand up for our values and our side, and who are not afraid. And I guess that's my message.
Well, that message ties in perfectly with breaking news right now on Breitbart. Our good friends, the Vaughns, Billy and Karen. Karen was there last night. Story just broke on Breitbart. I'll read you the title. We're going to do this story tomorrow. SEAL Team 6 family. Obama's rules are getting our warriors killed. It's a story of the rules of engagement of the Obama administration. How those rules killed Aaron Vaughn, SEAL Team 6 member, same rules that got Andy killed in many respects, lack of naming the enemy. Ladies and gentlemen, we just have 3 weeks and 1 day left to the greatest and most important election of our lifetime. Please get out and work for good people. We got to defeat this president. Tom Trento, Charles Jacobs, signing off, saying goodbye. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same bat channel. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Trento Vision, where bad ideas get pulverized and the truth will set you free. Your host, Tom Trento, is an activist street fighter with earned degrees in law enforcement, theology, and philosophy. To reach Tom, call 561-319-5533. 561-319-5533, or email him at tom@trentovision.com. Tune in again weekdays at 2 p.m. on AM 1470 WNN.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of the station, its staff, management, or sponsors.